I am Marissa Steinman. I will demonstrate sewing and plush creatures and some 3D work I've done, as well as a 3D program I wish to learn more about. Yeah, I play lots of video games and have been hoping to make my own animated series that I'm in the process of writing, where essentially there's these humans and sort of aliens working together. Currently, I'm reworking the alien design since I designed them when I was like maybe younger than thir- than 13. So some of them just look like animals standing on two legs, and I want them to look more alien. I started maybe like 2010 to 13. I don't remember exactly which year, but it was while I was in high school. I'm 24 now. I started sewing by first seeing how patterns worked by using and looking at patterns, just free patterns online, and then slowly getting more and more complex until ones that don't even resemble those free ones started coming out. At first, it was just like a cheap wolf loosely based off how I saw the cat pattern. And I originally started with cotton before realizing it doesn't actually work quite that well for making plushes. Fleece works rather well. Right, these two are called umtakij. It's essentially a stuffed animal. I bought these two to show how faux fur can look drastically different depending on just the type, because this one is rather thin and wiry while this one's just even if I fluff it up, it doesn't get to this level of thickness. I sort of wanted a headless dragon. Of course, it didn't come out exactly how I saw them in my head, because often with plushes you have to kind of work really hard to make them not cute. Even if they have no head and just a neck with tentacles sprouting out like this, and no eyes, they still look bizarrely cute. These ones, most plushes that stand on two legs don't stand up too well. This one I can sort of get to stand up like this. I start by designing a profile view, which is essentially a flat side view of the creature. Then you start adding some accessories that I want, like these would be on the thing but not actually become part of the pattern until later on, so that I knew I'd wanted them on. Same with the wings, would be drawn like this. Then those parts would be essentially separated out until this part, the flat profile, was what was left. And then you'd start adding, like, you trace the part of the profile essentially to make the underbelly. Just see what it looks like, start sketching it out. The wings you can't really make on the pattern like this. It'd look like this instead. It'd look drastically different if the wings were like this. It'd look more like a large fin. Well, many are just I have a character I want to have in 3D. And often I make a species out of them and sell plushes of the species. Like I've done a commission for one like this one with the exact colors. Though due to this being hand sewing and fleece being extremely stretchy, it came out a bit different. I really don't know how long it takes. I don't pay enough attention. I just get into it. Every time I tried timing it, I got too lost or something. I don't really give time frames. I explained that if you need it done by a specific time, though, it'd depend on the plush. I could be able to tell you if I couldn't do it by a specific time. Like often a day, especially while I'm not feeling that well, wouldn't be likely for most plushes. And some are smaller ones I do to sell for cheaper at them, but of course I still took time and care to design them to be unique. Often White Rock Artist Market, I'm also selling at Covento Gallery. Namely, currently my 3D prints are what I'm selling at Covento Gallery in Espanola. These are mainly the White Rock Artist Markets, especially since there's no commission, I can do lower prices. According to my dad, Etsy might take too much work, but I am planning on doing Etsy. But unfortunately, hand-making plushes is a bit hard to start a business off unless you do either the stranger requests or you make the ones that are much higher priced. These ones, I would sell one like these two for $30, as they're surprisingly not the hardest to sew, as they have few intersecting colors. The most expensive would be if it has any sort of markings, and I'm not doing them by paint. It would either have to be embroidered, intersection of other fabric, like stripes of fabric, or buying printed fabric, which is far more expensive. And it depends on if the print you want even exists. I like the Los Alamos Makerspace that it provides resources for if you can't afford your own 3D printer. I'm fortunate enough that my dad could afford both a 3D and resin printer, but a lot of people, because a lot of them, especially the safer, more reliable ones, either you need mechanical knowledge or engineering type knowledge or a very high budget to do. And actually, even if you bought a pre-kit one, you'd need a lot of knowledge of what you're supposed to do. Or that they have some sewing machines that are clearly more expensive models. More expensive than what I have, because I literally got the cheapest one they had at Walmart. That wasn't a garbage one. I'm planning on volunteering at the Los Alamos Makerspace. I have knowledge in multiple crafts that I'm sure other people would like to learn, including, while I'm not showing it here, knitting, which I mainly just knit scarves or currently a blanket for myself. They'll have to end the blanket soon as they discontinued the yarn I use. I mainly learned how to sew by using patterns from online and possibly stuff my mom taught me earlier or from possibly stuff I remembered, because I recall using, even before I actually learned how to sew, using those kits that would get you very basic plushes, the felt ones, where it was you'd sew with a plastic needle through the holes. So I just learned how to do patterns by studying those online ones and seeing what they were composed of. I also learned what materials work best, like these work better for machine than hand sewing because they're long enough that they're easy to pull out before you get to them and break the needle on them. Oh, I also improved on my sewing slightly from learning from someone else who knew how to sew in high school. I get inspired by animals. I often look up searches like weird animals, strange animals, to get ones that aren't just typical dogs or cats, that haven't been used by everyone, or just they look really cool but they've been overlooked by the general public. I also get inspiration from weird stains, clouds, and of course the occasional seeing something cool in someone else's work and then incorporating a similar feature into mine while still making it extremely distinct from theirs. I've also been planning on starting my own DIY channel on YouTube, mainly to solve a lot of problems I've seen with sewing DIY channels, such as using hot glue. I know hot glue is way more dangerous for kids than sewing is. And it's not and it's not gonna really hold. I don't usually work with cotton, I work with fleece. This is a good way to sew, is that you need to gently guide the fabric. It's not just going to magically go through. You also want to reverse while sewing so that it locks the stitches in place better. If you forget to reverse, though, you can go over, at least I think this works, you can go over the stitches like this, and I've read that holding these two tails of the thread you use helps prevent it from getting sucked under and what people call bird nesting. Yet this is a thing I've been working on. It's one of the few times I don't actually use a pattern to make a plush. I've been working with trying to paint faux fur. This is painted with a glow-in-the-dark paint, so it looks pretty much the same color as it is. This is close to natural color. This is the same one with some acrylic purple. This is a white with an acrylic blue. Or actually it was a forest green, but it doesn't look like green at all. And this is just a very watered down acrylic on the same white. These are tests with the jacquard fabric paints. So far, these have retained the texture of the faux fur the best, especially on this one, which is probably the nicest of the faux furs I've used. This one, there's a few clumpy areas, which I've noticed can be fixed by going over it yet again with, essentially, with a wet dog brush. This is a pattern I've been working on, which you can see, yeah, lots of pieces go into patterns. Well, I had the initial drawing I used to make the pattern. Drawing the pattern, I have to make sure I have every piece of and that I didn't lose anything. And then I can do, because one intention of mine with this is to replace essentially what would be this pink one with a Northern Lights fabric I bought from Hobby Lobby. It's an anthropomorphic sort of dragon-like creature. Here's essentially it from the side view from head to foot, just without its arms or legs or tail, and it'll have tendrils sticking out of its back, like this. This is how I make the head 3D, is this part, called a gusset. This is more faux fur I got from the fabric district at LA, I believe, as New Mexico really isn't the best place to get fur fabric. That isn't quilting fabric. Mainly because we have less independent fabric stores. While Los Angeles' fabric district has a whole district you can get faux fur at. Oh, this is also another tulip. Both of the glow-in-the-darks are tulip paint, which is one of the hardest to use because the tulip paint is kind of naturally very thick. So it requires going over multiple times. And this is probably extremely crappy white faux fur. You can see it's a different type than the other white faux fur. It was a sort of faux fur strip I bought. This is the 3D sculpting program Sculptress. It's essentially it's made by the same people who made the program ZBrush. It's free if you want. So this is the best way to decide if 3D sculpting is for you without shelling out a lot of money, since ZBrush is either $800 or a subscription of, I believe, once like $180, $170 every so often. I forgot what the exact time frame was. The main difference between 3D modeling and 3D sculpting is that you can see the process as you work with it and not work with the topology as much. The main reason I like sculpting over modeling, though, is that you can see it take effect while you're working with it. So it's a lot quicker to see what you're working with. While with 3D modeling, you're often stuck most of the time with a block of sorts. Yeah, 3D sculpting starts with a sphere, while most 3D modeling wants to, for characters, it's actually best to start with a cube, so that the topology is easier, I believe. As mostly with modeling, you're often doing it to port into something and animate. So a sculpt would take longer to animate unless you retopologize it in the program, in a 3D modeling program. I believe I saw Sculptress listed in Thingiverse and decided to try it out, as Thingiverse has it in their Getting Started folder or something similar. And I heard about ZBrush before. It was what I used to use to make 3D models to print. It does allow more free-form models than ZBrush does, as it just adds the topology as you make it. But you can also do similar things in ZBrush. Oh, this is made with ZBrush. You can get, it's easier to get an anatomically correct creature as you have essentially more control in ZBrush, but it does have an option of Sculptress Pro, which makes it work more like how Sculptress does. You can do a lot more in ZBrush, including you can pose your models if you got them rigged correctly to use their posing tool. It also does not have the poly count limit Sculptress has. If your Sculptress model gets too many polygons, it'll keep crashing. The issue is you have to work with the poly count. One way to work is that you turn down this detail slider. That means that the detail slider down means it gives you less polygons. You can see the end result of this point isn't as smooth, but it'll make it so you can make a bigger model without hitting that poly count limit. You essentially, with Sculptress, you just essentially start stretching the sphere with the grab tool, and then you can do this stuff like this with it as well. The draw tool can be used as well, especially to make an area to grab onto like this. For output, Sculptress and ZBrush, I believe you need a plugin to export as STL, so the output is OBJ format, which you then put into a program such as 3D Builder to turn it into an STL. STL is the main program format for 3D printing. This one, the horn broke off so you can see the infill. And also in 3D Builder, I can do stuff like cut the very bottom of the feet off so that it stands completely flat, while still not looking flat. For a traditional 3D printer, the FDM, I believe, which prints in layers rather than the resin, you need a flat base. You can also use a textured print bed like this to add a texture to the foot so that it doesn't look as ridiculously smooth in contrast to the rest of it. ZBrush also has much more detail abilities than Sculptress, as you can use their preset patterns and even use theirs to help create your own. ZBrush is rather expensive. Also, they work in different types, as Sculptress uses triangles like this rather than the quads. Blender uses. I've been planning on using Blender because you can animate and pose better when you have better topology. With posing, I could make my 3D prints far more visually interesting. And a lot of jobs want people who can use that for animation purposes, or at least can retopologize a 3D sculpt so that they can use lower poly models for inputting into games. I've done some rigging in Maya before for a class, but it was far easier as there was a teacher helping. I learn best if there's someone helping me rather than from the tutorials. One of the best things for character creation is being able to mirror your object. 3D modeling, takes much more time to be able to see the finished product or to be able to see what you're working with. You can manipulate not only the edges and faces, but you can also select a vertex and move it to fix things that way. Like you can see, this is unlike how quickly the push and pull starts to look like a face. This would take ages and multiple loop cuts to start looking like a face. Yeah, I've heard they made essentially a new sculpt mode or something similar in their new update. That's supposed to be good. But you can see like this is starting to rather slowly look like a face. And maybe they fixed the problem where mirror mode was slightly buggy, in that if you mirrored the wrong way, it would there was a split down the middle of models that got mirrored in Blender sometimes. Blender does do one thing easier than ZBrush and Sculptress, as you can export directly as an STL with Blender. Another common thing in Blender is also to, rather than work from scratch like this for the models, is to input a sketch or a reference image somehow to then use as the reference, which you move your model to match that. If you had a 2D profile sketch, and especially if you could make a good front view sketch of a character, it would help a lot. But you want it to look like this, where the topology to be like this, where it's all quads. I have Asperger's. Sometimes it makes it harder to focus, so I often have music or something going on in the background to help me focus. It might help me because I see things in other ways. With my creativity, it could help my creativity. Or sometimes with shows and stuff, I'm not as aware of the social stuff, so it makes me think of stuff other than that. Or other than stuff like, will this offend people? It makes me not be scared of that. Sometimes, though, I do have trouble talking, so it helps to have either more detailed instructions or someone asking questions so that I know what talking point to go on next. It's also, I prefer to communicate text or email for formal stuff versus the phone. See if you can get therapy. Actually listen to your therapist if they're saying good stuff. Try to find coping mechanisms that don't bug or anger people. Like, I fidget a lot, so I've taken up knitting and alerted the teachers immediately that that knitting and drawing helps me focus. With knitting, I use the plastic needles as they create less noise, and made sure to limit my movements to more like this. And if I could, sit more towards the back of the class, or not where it's disruptive, because I've had plenty of times where I couldn't work because some other student was tapping their pencil, clicking their pen. It just depends if I can get a decent seating arrangement. I prefer secluded, but if I'm sitting next to people who are still or who aren't wild, at least keep their movements to their own space, I can work sitting directly next to someone else. I've gotten better at noise as I've taken therapy to deal with it, with noise issues, so a lot of that was older. But still, mainly on noise, it should be the job of the people in charge to make sure that no one else is being loud enough to disrupt. If it's too loud, I can wear headphones and listen to music. I can do class. It's what I mean is it would be hard if someone was also like using a loud saw at the same time. But I think I could handle it. My dream is to be able to make and sell my creations and maybe my own animated works.